We first encountered the median voter theorem when we talked about voting behavior within Congress. But today we're going to look at the median voter theorem and how it applies to the public and their voting behavior. Basically, if you have a two candidate race, theoretically, the middle voter, the median voter, right, the one with the ideological views that are smack in the middle, if you just rank everyone out, from left to right, that person in the middle, right? So half of the people are to the left and half of the people to the right. That person is the deciding vote. So both candidates have to appeal to that person to swing them to the candidate side, right? So that median voter is crucial for winning the election. That's why we generally see in general campaigns, right after the primary election, that the two candidates from either party often, though certainly not always, seem kind of similar in their policies, right? There are big issues where they might differ, but a lot of their positions are actually quite similar. This was more the case before party polarization. Now, in primary elections, the two candidates, or however many you have, but we're going to stick with the simple model of two candidates, the two candidates are now both on the same side of the political spectrum, right? So in the case of a Republican primary, and we're going to use Republican primaries because of the example of the Senate in 2010, if you have a Republican primary and you have one Republican candidate who's relatively moderate, and you have one Republican candidate who's very conservative, they're going to have to appeal to the median Republican voter, right? So we eliminate all the Democrats and all the people who aren't registered for a party, and we're looking for that median Republican voter. And whoever gets that median Republican voter wins the primary election. But what happens if the median primary voter is actually more conservative? So that median primary voter votes for the conservative Republican candidate instead of the moderate Republican candidate. This means that when we then hit the general election and that conservative Republican candidate is up against whatever the Democrat is, if that Democrat was the more moderate Democrat, that moderate Democrat is now going to appeal to the median voter in the general election, right? The median from when all voters are counted, not just one party's. So the moderate Democrat has a much better chance at winning if the Republican primary nominated an extreme Republican. The same thing would be true on the other side. But we really see this play out in some Senate races in the 2010 midterms. 2010 was famous for the Tea Party wave, right? Tea Party candidates ran in Republican primaries, on Republican tickets, but they were very conservative Republicans, much more so than the party who had been elected to Congress was. And several Tea Party candidates actually unseated relatively moderate Republican incumbents. This meant that in a primary election between an incumbent Republican and a challenging Republican, the challenger unseated the incumbent. This happened, for example, in Delaware, where we saw Christine O'Donnell win the nomination, presumably because the median primary voter, and remember, primary voters tend to be more strongly partisan, so the median primary voter preferred O'Donnell over the incumbent moderate Republican. The thing is Delaware can actually go blue. We often see Democrats being elected from Delaware, but that seat had been held by a Republican for a while. So the Democrats hadn't planned on running anyone particularly special in that Senate race. And in fact, they weren't running anyone particularly special. They didn't think they could win. So they just ran someone sort of so they could say they were challenging the Republican. But next thing you know, O'Donnell has won the primary. And O'Donnell was kind of nutty. She's the one where, you may remember, you may not, she actually ended up having to basically deny that she was a witch, because in the past she'd done sort of Wiccan practices and sort of kind of practiced witchcraft a little. So she actually had to say in her campaign that she was not a witch. That just tends to be the kiss of death for a general campaign, because that is not going to appeal to the median voter. And that's certainly not going to appeal to moderate voters of either party or independent voters who are already likely to sit out midterm elections. So we have this really extreme Republican candidate and a sort of nobody Democratic candidate, but this nobody was relatively moderate. And that Democrat ended up beating Christine O'Donnell, most likely just because she was so unpopular and so extreme, even for the Republican Party, rather than that the Democrat was really at all popular. So we saw that a couple times in 2010, where the primaries pulled the party so far to the extreme that it really couldn't recover in the general election, right? Because we know, of course, that if a candidate runs as an extreme during the party and then they run as a moderate during the general election, they could be accused of being a flip-flopper or disingenuous, right? And people don't like that. People like genuine candidates. So once you run as an extreme candidate, you're sort of stuck there. Even if you can moderate yourself a bit, you can't become as moderate as you might need to be to win the general election. And certainly with Christine O'Donnell, she really didn't try to become moderate. She was an extreme candidate and ran as that in the general election. So again, we can see how the median voter theorem applies differently when we're talking about the median voter in a single party than when we're talking about the median voter in the electorate in general, and how that can pull parties to the extremes in the primaries and then make it more difficult for them to win during the general election.